Hi, this is Steve, and today I've got Jim Connor on the line. Jim Connor Banjo. Jim's America's famous old-time banjo player, played with the Kingston Trio, and he also was a member of the band for John Denver. That's right, and in fact, Jim penned the song "Grandma's Feather Bed," and which John put on his Home Again album, and it, boy, did it take off after that. How you doing tonight, Jim?
Oh, just fine. Glad to hear from you.
How's the weather wherever you are?
Well, it was sunshiny today, and then it clouded over. But we've got spring weather, and it's really nice. I've got to start sprouting my tomatoes before too many days.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So, hey, I want to thank you for your time tonight, and I just want to start off this first edition of this discussion in learning a little bit about you first. And so, tell us, how did you get into this banjo business from the beginning?
Well, uh, I had piano lessons starting in the first grade, given by my mother, and I had a cousin, uh, uh, female cousin, Marilyn, a couple of years older than me, and she started playing the uh, ukulele, and it had four strings. And the reason I bring that up is because of the four strings. It kind of interested me, and I learned some ukulele chords. Well, uh, somehow I decided to get me a banjo ukulele, and so I had seen them in newspaper pictures or something, and I went to the local music store in Gadsden, Alabama, and got me a four-string banjo ukulele, and I was just strumming around on it, and I liked the sound, the percussion sound of it. And somebody told me, "Hey, that banjo only has four strings. You're supposed to have five strings on it." And I said, "I am? Five strings?" They said, "Yeah." And so I looked around and started observing banjo players and on early TV on the Grand Ole Opry and stuff. And I said, "Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm just a young kid, preteen, you know." And so I took my pocket knife and bored a hole in the side of the banjo neck and put a stop in there and put a fifth string on it, and started diddling around. And I played in a couple of local talent shows, where they would give a prize, and I played the banjo. And it, I didn't win anything, but then one time I put the harmonica in my mouth that my granddaddy had taught me to play since I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I played the harmonica in my mouth and strummed the banjo. And I remember I won a gallon of ice cream on the Saturday morning at the movie talent show. And oh man, I was so excited. And I guess that started me off like, hey, you just strum the banjo and I won a gallon of ice cream.
That's
And
great.
I was about 10 years old. And so I just slowly but surely learned. But I uh, didn't really meet a really fine banjo player until my I was had finished high school and I was in college, and I came to my home area and went to a fiddlers convention where you have the contests of all the instruments: mandolin, banjo, fiddle, harmonica, buck dancing, clog dancing. And have different people enter the contest, and they gave a prize, usually money. I remember the prize I think was like $15, and I met a man there who played the banjo like it was just melodic to me, and his hands looked like they moved like a ballet dancer on the fretboard and on the banjo.
That's
He was
beautiful.
playing the old time style, and this was on Sand Mountain, Alabama, near just about 15 miles from where I was raised in Gadsden. And I asked him, uh, he was an older gentleman, gray hair and all, and if I asked him if he would teach me to play. And he said, "Yeah, just come on by my house he said, I live such and so, and I noted it down. And he said, just come by anytime. And I said, well, I'm it's still in college. I will come on Saturday night. And I did the next Saturday. I showed up about 6 o'clock because this was uh, early spring, so about 6, 7 o'clock. It by that time it's dark, and I knocked on the door, and his wife, she was still up. Uh, she said, "Oh, who are you?" And I said, "Well, your husband told me to come take a banjo. He would teach me to play his style of banjo." And she said, "Well, he's already gone to bed." And I knew it was only about 6:30, and I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I'll come back." And then I heard him say to his wife, "Who is that?" And she said, "Oh, this young man says you're going to give him a banjo lesson." And I told him you're already in bed, and he said, "Just a minute." And he came walking through the house in his pajamas with his banjo on his neck, and we sat down. I had my first lesson, and his name was Arthur Kirkendall, and he played the old time styles. And as the years go by, and I'm learning from him, he told me that he had learned it from his uncle Roe Kirkendall in the 1890s when he was a little kid, and Roe had learned it from a former uh, South Alabama slave who tinkered and welded on farms around and had a mule and wagon. He would go from farm to farm, tinkering your pots and pans and things, and he always played the banjo, and that's the source of the old time style as I know it. And I learned for 15 years from Mr. Kirkendall before he passed away at 90 years old in 1978. And that's where my style comes from. And I can play bluegrass style a little bit, but I love that old time style. So as far as performing, I stick with the old time style.
Jim, do a lot of people play the old time style, or do they? What's happening out there in the scene today?
There's always a loyal few, and I know several professionals who play both styles. Gary Waldrop of the Gary Waldrop Band, and he's a member of the Bluegrass Hall of Fame. Uh, he plays both styles on his show, mostly the pure bluegrass style, but then he'll play a number or two with the old time style. And he also learned, well, he learned from me, and he also had heard Arthur Kirkendall when Gary was a kid. Gary's about 20 years younger than me, and he had heard Arthur play and been by Arthur's house as a child. But Gary claims, well, he learned more from me. Well, Mr. Kirkendall didn't live long enough really to teach Gary much, and so, but and there's I every once in a while I'll hear a frailing. The frailing and rapping style is what the old time is called.
Gotcha.
And Mr. Kirkendall said that he rapped the banjo.
Uh-huh.
And then I've heard people say they frail the banjo or claw hammer is what some call it. Each of those styles, claw hammer, frailing, and rapping, are a little bit different, but they all have an open-handed rhythm style, and the way they use the 5 string is pretty much the same in the old time styles.
That's great.
And generally you do not wear finger picks. You play with your fingernails if they're strong enough. And at first mine were strong enough, and I kept breaking them. And then a young lady told me to eat gelatin, and I would strengthen my hair and my fingernails. And I ate gelatin for I don't know how many years, and my fingernails got real strong, and that I guess I've adjusted. I don't have to eat gelatin anymore. But the first few years I ate gelatin, and I could tell my nails got strong. And but that's the only thing about that style is that if your fingernails aren't strong, they'll chip off because you don't play with picks.
Gotcha. So I know I've had you here for almost 10 minutes, and I really appreciate it. I understand.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I read somewhere that you went to Harvard University. Is that is that true?
Yes, I went to Gadsden High School, and after I left Gadsden High School, I got a scholarship to Harvard. But I had a good record in high school, well, in good record all through my school. I went to 11th Street Grammar School in Gadsden, then Disque High School, and then graduated from Gadsden High School, and uh, school seemed not very difficult for me. Not bragging, but I used to think, hey, school is kind of silly. See, today, Steve, you know, classrooms, and my wife has been a teacher for many years in grammar school and K-12, and now she's a professor at a university. But in her classrooms, all these years later, you know, and you know this, the classrooms have all these things on the outside of the wall, on the inside walls, but on the outside of where you sit. If you finish your work early or you have time on your hands, they have computers and games and all sorts of things to keep you occupied. Well, it used to that we didn't have any of that in the classroom. You just had your books and your desk and the teacher, and that was it.
Yeah.
Pencil and pen. And so I would get in trouble because I would finish my test or my work assignment so soon, and I'd talk to people and I'd shoot spit wads. I was always in trouble with the teacher, and because I could finish my work early, and I didn't know that I had Harvard potential. I thought school was kind of silly. And this is why the teacher would say, and I remember I thought of this early on in the third or fourth grade. It occurred to me, the teacher will say to you, the class, we're going to have a test tomorrow, and it's going to be on chapter 1. Well, I realize all you have to do is read chapter 1 2 or 3 times, maybe outline chapter 1. You just read the answers to the test. She's not going to ask you about Tanganyika or something. She's going to ask you about what you read in chapter 1. And so I'd read chapter 1 and I'd write out or read the first and last sentences of each paragraph, and maybe the morning of the test, I'd read it through quickly again at home or at study hall, and I'd get all the answers, and it seemed simple to me. Well, in my junior year in high school, I was called to the principal's office, and there were 3 gentlemen in there dressed in really neat dark blue suits, and real nice ties. They were crimson ties, as a matter of fact, and their white shirts were ironed so perfectly, and their shoes were polished, and I didn't know what it was about. And we went into the principal's office, and the principal said, these gentlemen would like to ask you some very serious questions, Jim. And you know what? I had stolen a pair of pliers from Sears and Roebuck because I needed a pair of pliers and I didn't have any money, and I had to fix my bicycle. And I thought that I was being arrested for shoplifting. Really. And so, yeah, and I ended up trying to pay back Sears. I felt so guilty after this meeting, but they said, well, forget it. They didn't know how to take the money. I went by well, anyway, so I sat down in a chair, and they sat in the couch at the principal, opposite the principal's desk, and they said, we would like to ask you if you're interested in going to Harvard College. And it turned out they were 3 Harvard alumni, and I thought, wow, I'm not going to be arrested. And it seemed like, well, they're asking me, do I want to go to the moon or something? I mean, Harvard, you know. But my daddy had asked me, would I like to go to West Point? And actually, we had met our congressman who appoints you to West Point if you can pass the West Point test. And I told these 3 men and the principal, I said, well, I don't know. I told my dad I would go to West Point. And they said, well, we would like for you to try to to go to Harvard. And so we had several questions and answers. I was in there about 15 or 20 minutes. And later on, I did receive an application and I filled it out, but never dreamed that I would go to Harvard. And I received a letter. Oh, it was the next year that I filled out the application. Well, the end of my junior year, and turned it in and everything. And by golly, I got admitted to Harvard.
That's great.
It was a big surprise, and so that's what happened.
That's
and
great.
My parents were not all that thrilled, and they were unable to visit me the whole 4 years I was up there because it's like 1,500 miles from Alabama,
like
where we live.
Whole nother world.
But I had a grandmother who always encouraged me to go to Harvard because I had written about her in my entrance, in my application essay that they always ask for an application, for you to write an essay. I wrote about my grandmother, and apparently that essay really helped me get into Harvard. I was told 30, 40 years later, I was told that essay might have tipped me over to getting invited to go to Harvard because I so admired my grandmother, and she encouraged me and gave me extra money to make up for what the scholarship didn't pay for, and she was really the reason, because my parents were kind of scared, and they did not encourage me to accept going to Harvard, but my grandmother did. My mother's mother, and I always credit her with backing me up about going to Harvard. Way off up yonder in that big school up yonder is what they called it.
Yeah.
Way off, and nobody in our family had ever been that far north.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. I think can we pick this up in another podcast?
Oh, yeah.
I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your Harvard experience, and then maybe how you started, and then we'll segue into your first, how you got on the road and things. So,
well, yeah, and at Harvard there was a lot of music. It was the folk music era in the late 50s was just beginning. There were people playing, and there are people from all over the world go to Harvard and all over the United States. So there were pickers and singers. They were musicians from the Southwest. They were fiddlers. I met fiddlers and other banjo players, guitar players, harmonica players like me too, and there were several little clubs around Harvard Square that had music at the time, the folk and country music that was becoming part of the folk music era. And so anyway, I'd love to talk about it because I had a lot of fun and played a lot of music while I was in college.
Great. Well, thanks again, Jim, for your time tonight, and I look forward to talking with you again next time.
Well, you're sure welcome, Steve, and give my love to everybody, and bless your heart.
Will do. Good night, Jim.
Good night.